Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Courtenay podcast. I have a very special guest for you today. Returning is my dear friend Maryam Henein, and she's my birthday twin. And she has done some incredible work with her new book. It is all about the multi-layered psyop that was the George Floyd event, and we're coming up on the 5th-year anniversary. Hard to believe, 5 years, but all that craziness went down. So this is definitely, I highly encourage you to check out the book. It is fantastic. She does incredible, deep research, not just on the events and the circumstances surrounding it, and of course, investigating, all the evidence to present her case. But she actually goes really pretty deep into the psychological operations and the several layers that there are in that. So this was a really fun conversation. It's just kind of a teaser because her book is so dense. I think it's almost 600 pages. So it's very long and very detailed. So it is really thorough work. But I hope you enjoy the conversation and you learn a lot. And now, without further ado, let's bring on our guest, Maryam Henein. How are you doing today?
Hi, Courtney. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about my new book.
I am very excited about this as well. This has been a very long time in coming. Yeah. Ooh, I love the cover.
Yeah,
Yay. Yeah, I know
I
that
did
was
it.
quite a
I did.
process.
I did it like this so that, because they threatened to sue me, the George Floyd fund. So you can't go after any of the photos if it's like a collage.
Oh, that's so clever. I
I
didn't
can
know
be
that was
clever
the reason.
sometimes.
Yeah. I didn't know that was the reason for that. But I love
Yeah,
it. It's very artistic. It's very alluring. Like it invites you in, and there's so much there. And this way, you get to put all of it in, so
yeah,
you have the visual, but you can fit much more into the collage than you would have been able to, picking like screenshots.
totally.
Yeah. So, well, let's start out with what made you you've done a documentary film on this. You've now written a huge book, investigative piece, probably more than anybody who has really been covering this topic.
Yes.
It's been, very mainstream media coverage. Obviously, it's pretty much been we spent a whole summer devoted to it back in 2020. So people are very aware, but very few people have done the type of investigative work that you have done. What made you decide to? Like, why did you devote so much time? And yeah.
So it's been 4.5 years, and it was an active investigation as I was writing it. And if I were commissioned to write it today, like there's a bazillion footnotes that half of them are gone. They've been scrubbed off the internet. And I was in the jungle with Zach Voorhees, the Google whistleblower. And I have this in my book. He's like, Mimi, can you come and choke me? And I'm like, what? And he's like, I'm doing the George Floyd challenge. And I'm like, who's George Floyd? Imagine even asking that question today. And yet, when I do talk to people and I say, did you know that there was 2 other people in the car with him? There's so much that they left on the cutting room floor. So it started just covering the stories, and then actually a friend of Zach who doesn't remember saying this said, don't tap out. And I kept on finding more, hence why it's called the multi-layered psyop exposed. And I really in earnest wanted to understand. So I purchased with my own money all the footage, and even finding a accredited editor, which ended up being Sean Hibbler, to do the film. I'm very proud of the film. And I've seen how suppressed the real truth is. So, of all people, that these psyops, they dribble the, information. Like if you think about it, the RFK very heavily redacted, it's been 60 plus years. So I know as a visionary that this is for the future. It's like a record, and it's not what my soul, for instance, wanted to write. And when I finished it, and kind of in conjunction with like a reboot and a burnout, that I did plant medicine, and heard that I had been assigned to look in a very close way how the inverted matrix functions. And it's like, in fact, when you mentioned Tavistock, because Tavistock, and I mentioned John Coleman and Daniel Estelin in the book several times, that was part of what ended up in the book. And it's really, my friend told me, it's kind of a blueprint to educate people how deep how deep these psyops go. So to make a distinction, the movie, The Real Timeline, is about what happened between 7:30 and 9:30 when he was pronounced dead. And it's kind of doing a timeline to show the inconsistencies. The book is about everything else and all the characters. And I obtained, for instance, 340 internal emails between the MPD and the government. And you can imagine I found lots of things there. And how I did that was, one, I purchased George Floyd's debt from Cup Foods. So one of the Palestinian owners, I paid him $20 so that I can have a valid reason to run his social security number. So I bought the debt. Then I did a FOIA, because during this unraveling, there was in August a lawyer that claimed that it wasn't the real George Floyd. But however, I think you would agree that in these psyops, they interject red herrings. So then they can say that, we're all conspiracy theorists. So this lawyer, attorney Timothy Jaffet, he had a few interviews with people that he knew don't know the story like the back of their hand. But with me, he blew me off. So the reason I did the FOIA is because he claimed that it was a deceased social security number. So I was like, oh yeah, mofo, I'm gonna do a FOIA for the social security number, which is a valid social security number attached to a George Perry Floyd. Now, I show in the book, they sent me the social security number. I find it very interesting. I bolded all the 33s. There's 254 instances of
What?
33. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you point
But
out a lot of the Masonic symbolism, which
yeah.
yeah, we'll definitely go through
So
that because that's very
so when they
interesting.
sent me the social security number, on the top it says 330 on the right hand side. And so once I had the social security number, then I had to wait a year to find a private eye with the balls to run it. And he's like, what do you expect to find? And I said, I do pattern recognition, and I'm just following a hunch. And then I found hush money to a baby mama and a child that nobody knows about 24 days before George Floyd is killed or dies or whatever. And it's for $5 million. And George Floyd would have to be making $1.7 million to justify that. When I did all the back pay for this child, it came up to a whopping $46,000. And so I'm very detailed, and I didn't plan to write a whopper of a book. But if you think about it, it's a record. It's the Ministry of Truth is rewriting our history in real time. We've seen definitions like vaccine changed, for instance, in September 2021. So I know this is for the future, long before I'm gone. And now I'm no longer interested in looking at the dark. And I call it like the Heath Ledger effect, that it really, these past 5 years have had a toll on my soul. And I just found a lot of things that would fit under the characteristics, and I have a whole chapter on the characteristics of a psyop.
Yeah. So you want to outline some of that? Should we watch the trailer first,
Sure,
and then we can
sure.
talk about the differences
Yeah,
between the movie and
absolutely.
then we'll discuss
Yeah,
what makes.
if there's anything that sticks out in your head about this operation, and then we could talk about the latest in the news, for instance, and the motion to free Derek Chauvin.
Yes, let's do that.
trust me, I got a strike. Don't touch him. Don't touch I got this all on camera. Watch out. Don't touch me.
Third precinct is up in flames.
We begin with breaking news in South Minneapolis.
Caught on tape, a black man pinned to the ground, later dying after a white officer kneeled on his neck.
It started with a report of a forgery in progress and ended with Floyd's death. The situation has become volatile at the 3rd Police Precinct tonight.
As police officers and protesters clash over a man's death.
Miles from Minneapolis, anger, frustration pouring into the streets of America.
I can't breathe.
It all stems from this video.
What we saw was he can be heard on the video saying, "I can't breathe."
Police officers involved have all been terminated.
You see your hands.
You can ask Mr. Adams about me. Man, I'm scared as fuck, man. Let's start breathing. Let's start breathing. It's gonna go off on me. I can't choke. I can't breathe.
That's my ex. He got a thing going on. I'm telling you about the police. He have problems.
Not move, not one time, bro.
He's off track right now.
But yeah, bro, go back in the store.
What happened to him?
Fucked up. All right.
They fucked him up.
Fucked up.
You took your ID?
Yeah.
So what happened? More drama at Cup Foods?
Cup Foods, yeah. It was just a forgery report. The person that had given him a fake bill, we went over there and...
Bananas?
Yeah.
So, so that's the screener for the movie. And so, as you said, the movie is really just outlining the events of that day from that timeline. I remember this like very, very well, actually. It's kind of weird to look back at that time in my life was just like, it's like a 180, from where things are today. Like it's almost like a time warp. I feel like things were just so, so different. I was living in a different state and just everything was really, my whole life was really very different. But I remember this and I remember what was being shown and, what was being promulgated in all the media platforms, on all the social media. And I remember it was very similar to the experience that I had with the whole COVID narrative, right? What was going on with that. I had a reaction like immediately. I think a lot of people probably felt like I was a little bit heartless, and I didn't mean to come across that way in either case, on either issue, but I just felt intrinsically like it was a very strong intuitive hunch that this was an op. And I just didn't buy what was being sold at all. And I remember it so well because I got into arguments with people on both of the issues. And I just said they're not telling us the full story. And it was so apparent to me. So it's really interesting watching this now because with the knowledge that I have, from your work and from, what has been released even in the mainstream since then, you watch that footage even of him saying, I can't breathe, and of, him kneeling on him. And it looks very different. It doesn't have the same kind of impact, right? Everybody was so emotionally heightened at that time.
Right.
And so they preyed on that. And that's part of how trauma-based mind control works, right? All of your rational faculties get kind of sidestepped because you're in that state of, oh my gosh, like this is traumatic, right? That kind of, and so you're led by the emotionality of all of it rather than being able to really see some of the evidence clearly. So
that's so true. I was not even in America. I was in Costa Rica, and the way the investigation started after he Zach did the George Floyd challenge and saw that he could still breathe, you know, what came to my mind, one of the first things that alerted me that there was more here, was the "I can't breathe" mantra, because that day, Thomas Lane, one of the officers, is the only one sporting a baby blue face diaper. And then literally the next day on the steps, while the Justin Trudeau knockoff Jacob Fry was having a presser, he seemed fake, and they're all masked. And you have this mantra of "I can't breathe." Personally, being so sensitive, what came to my mind when I wore a face mask within literally seconds was, I can't breathe.
Right, of course.
And so it's I say in the film, we went from virus to violence overnight. And I guess because of the state of pressure of being locked down, that you're more susceptible to believe this BS. And then when, you know, they dribble the Psyop and keep it going as episodes. So in August, so now this is 4 months later, Keith Ellison is sitting on the body worn footage. And when it was released, it was the Daily Mail. And I'm still in the jungle. And I'm like, oh, how did this guy get access to this footage? Because when I saw it apart from the incident we were showed, I'm like, this is like a 46-year-old adult who's acting like this little bitch, like crying, and like, this couldn't fly if I was arrested, and that I'm crying like this. So when I went to reach out to the journalist at the Daily Mail, I'm like, I'll be damned. I used to leak vapid Hollywood information when he worked for In Touch magazine. Like literally the last time I saw him was at the Chateau Marmont. And it was like, I think I sold him information about Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt. Like that's how, you know, because I was in Hollywood, and here I am now being called a, you know, I went through, this was very preliminary, it was only August, and I went through my list of even things like, oh, this is happening at 8:30, at 7:30, but if you look at the event, the sunlight doesn't change. It doesn't look like the sun is setting. And all of the things that I brought up, you know, I brought up the bricks, I brought up the destruction, and his response is, what is it with you people, you conservatives, and George Soros? He's a businessman. I don't really care what he does. And first of all, I had not defined myself as a conservative. I was looking at it as a journalist. And so then later to find out, he said it dropped in his lap. But when you look at Darnella Fraser, the woman who is filming this on her phone, like, she got a Pulitzer Prize, Courtenay. This is a Pulitzer Prize. This is a Pulitzer Prize. This is amazing journalism. Pulitzer Prize for using your phone. And she got props from like Martin Scorsese. In one magazine I show in my book that she got praise, but then they redacted it. And I say, maybe it was even too much for the MSM to say such BS. And, you know, like Barbara Streisand gave Pink Floyd, the daughter, Pink Floyd, they gave her shares of something or other. And it was just like kind of over the top. And then the more I looked, the more layers there were, because there's a whole chapter. I bought all of George Floyd's mugshots, and it's really with, you know, connecting the dots. And so I didn't tap out. And then I did one interview with Red Pill 78. And after my interview with Zach, I had someone approach me on Twitter and say, you're the only person that I've seen that has done more research than me. And so then I said, well, can we move to a Telegram channel? So let's say when I'm looking at I'm on the chapter for the funerals, and I say, okay, I'm on the chapter on the funerals now. So he would drip stuff, and then I would take it to the next level. So for instance, when it came to the funeral, he showed me a guy that had gotten an invite to one of the funerals, and I then looked to see who was organizing the funerals. And, if I were to ask you, while we were burying people via effing Zoom, like if I were to ask you who orchestrated not one, but 4 funerals,
Right.
what would you say?
Who orchestrated 4 funerals
Yeah,
at once?
who was behind the funerals?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's the
Yeah.
United States government.
Wow.
It's the United States government. It's a PR firm for the United States government with ties to the Podesta Group and Al Sharpton. So when I told this guy,
For Floyd's funeral? Is that what you're saying?
yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
So
It was
when
so
I came
public.
across
It's crazy, though.
the Podesta Group, he's like, wow, you were in the lion's den and now you just put your head into the lion's mouth. And he's like, what you do scares the shit out of me. And then a few days later, I was like, he's like, I'll be back. And then intuitively, I was like, is he going to delete the Telegram chat? So luckily I saved it because it had pearls. And a few days later, he disappeared. And then when my movie came out, he popped up on Twitter, and I think he was offended that I was selling it to try to recuperate my monies, and blocked me out of maybe fear, out of being upset. I don't know. He was like this was a guy in Canada that he was I guess a hacker, and I don't know. I called him Mr. X. And there was another person who helped me with the nitty-gritty research, because I say, like, I was in the bowels of George Floyd. I had very few people to compare notes with or even discuss, and Zach Voorhees would be like, Mimi, are you still working on your George Floyd book? And I'm like, you're so dumb, buddy. I'm writing for the future. I have vision. I know what I'm doing, and I'm documenting history.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was going to write a whopper of a book, but I'm very thorough, and it's like a deep state thriller, and I find it fascinating, the things that I found, the connections that I drew.
So you call it a multi-layered psyop. Do you want to discuss a little bit of what you think, like what comprises a psyop, and why is this multi-layered?
Well, it's like those dolls, those Russian dolls, where
Yes.
you open one and then there's another, and it serves multi-purposes. So for instance, on one hand, there were 300 so bills that were enacted as a consequence of the duty to intervene. And it was also basically an exercise that they played out, a duty to intervene, where now, the cops, it doesn't matter ranking, right? It doesn't matter. They changed policing. They changed the face of policing. They enacted surveillance because of the trial. For instance, in Minneapolis, there was operation that continued despite people not knowing. It also served to get more vaccines into the arms of Black people, the number one vaccine hesitant. Oh, look, the government cares about racism. Maybe this vaccine is not dangerous. Maybe the Tuskegee experiment, is just a lot of hoopla. So, for instance, they look to Black Lives Matter to see the messaging, which they then took to adopt to increase vaccination rates. So, I could read a part about psyops, but it served many, many different purposes. Also, in truth, this is a money laundering Mexican cartel operation, and the violence that erupted allowed for the destruction of a lot of evidence. Like Catherine Austin Fitts said, this wasn't it happened all along Lake Street. So she says this was a real estate opportunity, And it came to me intuitively again, like, I wonder if Lake Street is where a lot of the shenanigans with, basically, if the audience are new, have seen the Ozarks, like Derek Chauvin was a Marty Bird. I mean, there was a tax evasion case nobody knows about, a lot of unaccounted money. He worked at other clubs related to the Mexican cartel. His wife had they had businesses, like a photography business, like literally like the Ozarks. And when I went to interview or question the judge that was proceeding over the tax evasion case, so I looked him up to see if he was part of the overlords or compromised, and he had actually taken on child trafficking and the cartels. And I reached out to him, let's say May, and he died in March at 66, and he left behind 6 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren.
What?
Like, really? Yeah. Yeah. So they offed him, and I can maybe read that part.
Yeah.
But there's so many little jewels of things that I found out. And so I know that this book is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, this is a print. It's a print. And I was told when I was in Mexico that there's a term called improvising. So let's say there's like a controversial music album. They'll release one single, they'll hold, and then the time passes. So, I'm hoping that the third publisher, it's a year late, it was like that he puts it out. I don't think that people really care, because it was messed with the formatting, but it's about the contents. It's not about the formatting. And I've written ebooks, but I didn't know, it's a whole other ball game when it comes to in the formatting and so forth. So that was effed with. And I mean, there's so many things I could say. Should I read something?
Yeah, please.
Like, I can speak about Derek Chauvin and this pardon that was initiated by the Daily Mail. I don't know who's behind the Daily Mail. I'm sure you know more than I do. Do you care to say anything about
the Daily Mail?
But why are they initiating pardon Derek Chauvin? Why is Ben Shapiro initiating that?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't have like receipts on either of those things, but I do think that there's, media fronts who get leaked information or green light information to front head things. And I think it serves many purposes, when you say it's a multi-layered psyop. So oftentimes it's at an appropriate time when they deem they want the focus to be on something. That's when it's certain big headlines are given the go ahead to release it, right? Because why now?
Well, I could have said why now, in that 2 of the officers are already released. I don't know if people know that. Here we are a year and a half later. Nobody knows the details of the stabbing because Derek Chauvin got shanked. So, I mean, have you heard any of the details? So if you have a FBI informant, Mexican cartel leader, the FBI informant in truth never snitched on the cartel. He went rogue and embarrassed the cartel, and he only wants to speak to the B lady. That's me. And the week of the anniversary, while 60 Minutes and Fox is trying to get John Tursak, aka Stranger, to give them an exclusive, he's only wanting to talk to Maryam. And I said, dude, you and me are not a good combo. And then I ordered that week of the Black Friday, I ordered a burger and I got a big fat cockroach in the burger. And I know, well, there's no way you could have oh, didn't see the roach in there. That's not possible. And it's no way the roach got in there after. It's possible that the driver put a cockroach in there, but it's just very suspect,
Do you
for
think
me.
it was do you think it was like a recording?
I don't know. I joke to myself like, oh, you guys think I'm the bee lady, but you must think I'm a cockroach because I won't go away. I've said that out loud, and I get a cockroach. And for instance, 2 weeks ago, I'm looking at my networks, my Wi-Fi networks, and there's a Curious George network. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the movie, you'll see that George Floyd is holding a banana and he's signaling. Nobody sees who he's signaling to, but I know he's signaling to someone who's involved at the Cup Foods. And then at the back of the firefighter, Thomas Lane is about to explain what's going to happen. And this fire goes, he went bananas. So I thought about the banana that he happens to be holding. So then I was looking at that image and I told Zach, do you think there's any connection to Curious George? And he goes, Mimi, that's racist. Okay. So I went to look at the Curious George series. Oh, look, the last book in the series is called Curious George Goes to the Hospital. Okay, so Curious George swallows a puzzle piece, aka the drugs, aka the truth, and he gets sick and he goes to the hospital. And the doctor is called Dr. Baker. Well, I'll be damned. That's the medical examiner's name, Dr. Baker. Are these all just big coincidences?
Well, so you had asked about Daily Mail, and Daily Mail was created by Northcliffe. And Northcliffe was, involved in the British Propaganda Bureau, the predecessor.
So I was asking about Daily Wire, but go ahead.
Oh, okay, because I thought you said Daily Mail, but Daily Wire, no, I thought you had said Daily Mail. But yeah, no, that would have been really interesting. Daily Wire, I don't know. I mean, I think his whole thing is, that this it's a Black Lives Matter issue, right? That this is all about, and now he's feeling vindicated that this was, not the narrative that they had purported it to be. But I don't know why he's getting the...
No, that's not what they're saying. They're saying that Derek did not get a fair trial, and he absolutely did not get a fair trial. I covered the trial every single day for Activist Post, and anyone who's actually paying attention to the trial would know that from the perspective of how it went down.
Yeah, so that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that, that is what I'm saying. So I think he feels vindicated because he's saying that he's using that to vindicate his stance that, Derek didn't get a fair trial. And now it's coming, it's more widely accepted that possibly he didn't get a fair trial. Whereas at the time, that was like a very taboo stance to take. So, but why he's getting the, I don't know how else to put it, but like a green light to frontline that I don't really know. Yeah, I mean, I could only speculate.
Because they have a whole petition that is initiated by the Daily Wire. And to your point, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, sure.
That I mentioned that the Daily Mail and Lord Northcliffe and Tavistock, because I was like, I wonder what the Daily Mail got to leak the story, the footage. And so, we'll see that. We will see in the narrative that Derek will, I think, get vindicated. But however, with that said, nobody even knows the status or the details of the shanking. And because the shanker doesn't want to talk to anybody, the story has kind of stayed idle. I can tell you that the irony is that he got stabbed 22 times. John told me the details of how he fashioned this weapon, but when he went to jail, his lung was punctured, and Derek Chauvin said, I can't breathe. I can't write this any better.
Wow. So I guess before we move on then, what are your thoughts on what's going on with Daily Wire in this case? And I'm assuming that, you wouldn't be I mean, would you talk to Ben and have a conversation
I
about it?
would, but
Yeah.
but anyone that says that Ben would have me on, I am going to say he's an operative. He went and studied at the School of Assassins. He trained with dictators. So do they want that information? No, because the Derek Chauvin even family blocked me. And so this movie that you see, this movie was shown to Liz Collins. Liz Collins is with Alpha News. She plays the independent journalist, and she is married to Lieutenant Kroll, who is the Trump supporting lieutenant that had to resign because of the politics of what was going on. Her film showcases the police, what happened in Precinct 3. And it's a tragedy because they basically know the cops were just left. So it's I'm not poo-pooing the film.
Right.
But however, there's a scene in my movie, which I know you will recall, when Tu Tao, the Asian officer, is basically signaling to the bystanders, slash extras, and then they all move in unison. So that particular shot was shown to Liz Collins, and she just brushed it off as I'm a conspiracy theorist. However, in the movie, The Fall of Minneapolis, they sneak in that shot completely out of context that only Maryam and my editor would know, because it doesn't make any sense. It's just shoved in there, the shot that he says. So it's a little FU, which you know that they insert little FUs, or we were here. And then when the movie came out, it was lauded by conservatives, and then she got to go on American Thought Leaders with Jan Yanelik. Well, Jan knows who I am. I wrote a story for the Epoch Times that went viral, and they never gave me another gig. So is it because I have tattoos? Is it because I have a potty mouth? So if she's an Emmy award-winning journalist, even though she's playing in alternative media, she's still part of the establishment.
Right.
You see? And so that's where the layers come in, because yes, he didn't get a fair trial, and we all have a constitutional right to have a fair trial.
Yes.
But there's way more. So I'll read you.
So when you say that you think he's an operative, where does he fall into that?
Who? Derek?
No, Ben, because you were saying that.
Oh no, not Ben. I don't know enough about Ben.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
saying
because
Derek.
you were saying like you would. You said you would talk to him, but you don't think that he would have.
I don't think they want to have the truth that this is multi-layered, and Derek Chauvin, they want to present him as a conservative, and they want to lobby their left-right, game back and forth. I don't think they're going to say, what was Derek doing in Germany? What was he doing at the School of Assassins? Why did he graduate as a cop? Why did the technical college that he graduated from was responsible for a training the day that Derek Chauvin was arrested? Was scheduled a training, some driving training, where Derek was listed on that training, but they canceled it. So when I called the technical college, crickets, no one, I didn't know that they orchestrate trainings. And then nobody called me back, I looked to see who are the who's funding the Dakota Technical College. Well, Ecolab and Planned Parenthood and all the usual suspects. And nobody could tell me the nature of this, because one of the characteristics of a false flag is that they have a training, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So the exercise was duty to intervene. This was a design that they played out. That's one of the layers. And so I'm saying that I don't think that they would want to go all the way and really say the nefariousness behind this all. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing, and I do agree with this, is that this was very much utilized to heighten the, left-right divides, and to create Hegelian tensions, right? The Republican, Democrat, left, right fighting each other. And so the people could align with various identity groups and the further cement those tensions and create those poles. And if they were to expose what was really occurring, then a lot of that would be shattered, and that would be very potentially dangerous. And of course, the various players that you're mentioning, they represent, whether wittingly or unwittingly. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but they represent I'm the conservative. They wear the banner. So people, when they hear those narratives coming from those personalities, they trust them as their right wing or conservative, or they go to Rachel Maddow and hear their left wing talking points, and that affirms, okay, I'm, this is where I sit. I'm in this box. And so if you had some of those illusions shattered, that this was an operation that was designed to foment those tensions, that would potentially be very dangerous. Is that kind of?
Yes, I think so. Yes, absolutely. And so I do think the book is dangerous because it has receipts and
Sure, yeah.
information. And this was used to usher in a color revolution and to destroy history. So I'm just going to read.
Yeah, please.
I want to read another part, but this is about the tax evasion. So it's this subsection. This is in the Derek Chauvin. Tax evasion, an easy way to keep your money. Speaking of unaccounted money, in July 2020, in a 1-2 punch, Derek and his now ex-wife Kelly Chauvin were charged with 9 felony counts of tax evasion due to an investigation conducted by the Minnesota Department of Revenue and Oakdale Police Department. Washington County Attorney Pete Orput said the investigation had been in the works long before Chauvin became globally infamous for his role in Floyd's death. His office had been sending Chauvin letters since 2019 with no response. According to the complaint, the couple apparently did not file tax returns in 2016, 2017, or 2018. They also failed to report income from various jobs, including more than $95,000 from Chauvin's off-duty security work. The criminal complaints in the case allege that from 2014 through 2019, the Chauvins underreported their joint income by $464 and 433 cents, and owed the state $37,868 in unpaid taxes, interest, and fees. Between 2014 and 2019, Derek Chauvin made $52,000 and $72,000 annually as a police officer. The average annual salary for police officers with more than 10 years tenure is $70,000. So how did he make 6 digits? On June 26, 2020, a month after George Floyd's death, investigators interviewed Kelly, whereupon she stated that both she and Derek jointly handled finances. Derek and Kelly first met during one of his shifts. He brought someone in for a health check after an arrest to Hennepin County Medical Center. After taking the suspect to jail, Derek returned to the hospital and asked her out. Kelly had started in the emergency room as an intern before going to work full-time at HCMC for 13 years, the hospital where George would be pronounced dead. Did any of the staff recognize Derek? At 9:05 on May 25th, Derek is seen in the hallway, presumably in the ER. Was it common practice for a supposed racist brute to show up to check on an arrestee? Did someone tell him and tout to go? If they were racists, then why were they cordial with Maurice and Shawanda? And how was Alexander Kang racist when he himself is Black? Kelly, who was the 2018 Mrs. Minnesota American winner, was married to Derek for about a decade, since 2010. As Minnesotan citizen journalist Jewel Eldora remarked, this makes Derek Chauvin Mr. Mrs. Minnesota. So I want to just get to the part about the guy that he got whacked, because I can go on. It's very. So he also worked, for instance, at MA Ontro Bar. This bar also has ties to the Mexican cartel. Oh, here. So in May 2022, I reached out to county attorney to ask him if there was any way the Mexican cartel was involved. But Pete Orput was now dead. He died just a few months prior, just 10 days after a stomach cancer diagnosis. He was 66 years old. Orpit was survived by his wife, Tammy, 6 children, and 6 great-grandchildren. Were all these 6s a signature? A message for those of us who could decode it? When I dug deeper, I learned that Orpit had locked away many murderers and sex traffickers. I ventured to guess the cartel did not like him.
Wow.
You know, if someone actually bothers to read this, they will understand why my life is, is that they don't want this to come out. What can I say? It's like, I'm not going to be Alex Jones where I'm going to backpedal. I'll be like, here's my receipts, mofos. What you going to do?
Yeah. Well, so all these signaling, and you had pointed out quite a bit of so I mean right there all the 6s, and there were several others, right? You had pointed out a lot of kind of Freemasonic type of symbolism, right?
Yeah. And I
you-
have a chapter I can read a
Okay.
little bit more about that if I think the chapter that this is chapter 29,
Yeah.
blood
Okay.
deaths
Yes.
and human sacrifice, with a photo of kind of like the 3 officers that are bending over George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
Because
This is-
I just will say that
Yeah.
I started this not knowing about Freemasons,
Okay.
kind of wondering, are these 33s, are these people like conspiracy theorists?
Right.
Just being questioning. And
Right.
all right. So initially I thought George Floyd was all just lemony snickets, a series of unfortunate events,
Mhm.
until I pondered the gaping holes, fantastically odd coincidences, my incredulous discoveries, and the extensive, consistent efforts to smudge out certain facts. What was really happening behind the scenes? The media and government told us to believe our eyes, but as I've clearly outlined, there was way more going on. I found investigating this case a lot like peeling an onion or opening a Russian doll, only to find another doll nested inside, another layer revealed, another hidden agenda behind another, creating this juicy, multi-layered psyop. My research inadvertently led me to Freemason symbology, as it is littered in the event. When I first heard of all these references, I rolled my eyes in skepticism, but as I started seeing the signs on my own, I concluded it served like a signature of sorts, akin to them writing, "We were here," on a bathroom stall with a Sharpie. It served as an inside joke, a secret FU for those of us who could see. On one hand, Freemasonry is just a benign fraternal club of our great-grandfathers, a kind of nepotistic MLM, but there is something beyond the 33rd parallel, asserting that, yes, there is a group of people who hold far more power and relevance than we realize. So then I go into all the 33s, the 250, for instance, squad 30, they lied and said that the episodes, the violence was on outburst on 33rd Street, but it was actually 38th Street. George Floyd lived on 3333 Alabama Street, a federal public housing, which is actually where they go and find their informants. So there is a good chance that when George Floyd went to jail for aggravated robbery in Houston, when he was let off, because nobody knows that apparently George, he was a truck driver.
Right.
And so then my hunch was like, there's a drug corridor going from Minneapolis down to Houston or Houston. And indeed there is. So what was he driving back and forth? What is really going on there? Do you see the level of why they wouldn't want to have this out there, Courtenay?
I do. I'm very curious. I apologize. Normally I would have read this beforehand. I'm so curious.
Yeah.
But I have so many questions. But knowing what I know about these occult groups, that I do really feel like they do pull a lot of strings behind the scenes. And I do think that there's also warring factions within a lot of these occult groups. There's they may have aligned worldviews and shared telos, but there's battles for power behind the scenes. And I do think a lot of them are tied to a lot of these cartels as well, because the cartels are a way of amassing the power and money, and also of creating chaos, right? Which is also a steering tool. So, all that to say, I guess two just kind of more direct questions. One is, did you come across Boule in any of this? Yes. Okay.
There's a whole chapter on Benjamin Crump and his ties to the Boule.
Okay.
Definitely, and the theme of twins. And what did I want to say? Also, I will say that when I connected with John Tursak, aka Stranger, who shanked Derek,
yes,
that he told me something very interesting. They have a code of honor. They are not down with killing children and women, for instance. And so while I was researching this, which may seem like a naive statement to you or your audience, I'm like, I wonder if the government is using the cartels as a cover. And literally in my search to see if I could find anything that backs that up, I found, and I interviewed him on Truth Lives Here many years ago now. And he is a professor from Mexico, and he was in the middle of translating to English his book, Los Cartelas Non Existar. The cartels do not exist. And so I also have a chapter where I'm looking at, well, what does a cartel look like in the 21st century? It's very decentralized and it's very compartmentalized, just like these psyops, where not everyone in the psychological operation has the full scope. So for instance, when I even tell people, did you know there was another Black guy with George Floyd and he's effing in jail? How about his Black life? Does anybody give a crap? No. Right. So when I was looking at Maurice, so Maurice Lester Hall is across the street and he's being babysat by a park police guy and he's with Shawanda. And I looked at all the footage like hundreds of times, fast, slow, with sound, without sound, looking for the glitch, looking for something that I could find. So my intuition was that Maurice was a snitch, and that initially that he helped drug George because he's positioned as the one feeding George the drugs. Okay, so then I do a FOIA. I do a Freedom of Information Act. I get his file. Maryam's right. He was a snitch. And then he goes quiet, or he doesn't cooperate with the police. So I call him and I'm surprised that he picks up the phone. And he thinks I'm a reporter with the Washington Post. And by the end of the call, he says, ask your team if they're interested in some footage I have of George Floyd and I at Chuck E. Cheese. And I'm like, yeah, I'll ask my big team of Uno and if they're interested. So then I don't hear from him. So I'm thinking, shit, he found out that, I'm not toting the narrative. But he calls me back and we hit it off. And, he's calling me mama. He's like, so he says to me, Mimi, on piece of paper, I read like a piece of shit. And I said, yeah, I know. I thought you were a piece of shit. So what ended up happening in the narrative is that Maurice goes back to Houston. Somehow he doesn't get arrested. He's not questioned. And this counterfeit money, nobody really follows through on it. Okay. So he's found in Houston. He's pulled over. They surround him. They question him. And what ended up happening is that they said, you need to go. I still don't know who paid for this. It's the mother couldn't tell me like who paid for him to go to this very expensive rehab. Right. So I'm looking at patterns and I'm looking at the docket. Everything was sealed. So of course, from my perspective, I'm like, oh, he's working with the feds, and he is found to have the early beginnings of mental illness. And there's a term for it.
Mm-hmm.
And like all mentally ill convicted felons, the day after that, he went to do Good Morning America, you know? So what ended up happening is that they told him, we're going to give you a new lease on life. We are going to, this was a new beginning for him. And he believed what they were told because he was going to be a key witness. But in truth, he was the scapegoat for whatever reason. If the